there's a very clear currency war at the moment as well,
Yes.
playing out. There are clear issues with the dollar. China has been, as Steve McClurg told when he was on the show yesterday, he said China has not been accumulating US Treasury bonds. They clearly are spotting an opportunity if there is runaway inflation or issues with the dollar, or if there's that the China can position itself as being another reserve currency. And if you've got these nations with particular interesting assets such as airports and ports around the world, and they are in requirement of money, they can become slaves to this new Chinese currency.
Yeah,
but so
very easily.
but the place I was going with this is that I don't think the US can now beat China at a currency level with its own currency. Because what choice it has? It has to either make a freer currency, or they have to be better at control. And they're not going to be better at control because they're not going to go down the authoritarian route that China's gone down.
Well, we'll see.
Well, they might try, but they're not going to do it to the extent that China's done it because they don't have full control of the systems. You would not get away with a CBDC linked to a social credit score, linked to cameras, linked to full control of access to services like they've got in China. That's not going to happen in the US. It wouldn't get away with it. And if you try to, it would take so long to get through because civil liberty groups would protest against this. It would go to Congress, whereas China just gets to do it. So if you cannot beat them at control money, you have to beat them at freedom money. You have to create the most free money out there.
Yeah.
And the best thing is it already exists. They don't have to do anything, and that money will win.
And currency competition is not something that should be treated with concern. Like Hayek writes about this in the Denationalization of Money quite well. And Nick Anthony at the Cato Institute just put out a good policy brief on this as well, where he says the U.S. should actually welcome currency competition. And I think he makes a similar argument to one that I have made, which is that even if you don't use Bitcoin, you should appreciate its value in eliminating a monopoly. Like, monopolies are bad, and almost everyone can kind of agree that when you have a monopolistic actor, they lose all incentive to be decent to their consumers. So you can actually relate this going up the thread a bit to the point about the IMF and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. So from 1971 to like 2011, the average number of IMF loan conditionalities was like 430 something. What that means is, when the IMF is sort of giving a country a debt relief package or a currency or a government experiences some crisis and the IMF is going to bail them out, they would attach with that money a set of conditions. And for years, some of the IMF conditionalities were, lengthy and absurd, almost like Kafkaesque, like all these hoops you have to jump through. So how does China compete with the IMF when they launch the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank? They do what you're saying America would do with currency. No strings attached. They just start handing out cash to people. Well, very quickly, the average number of IMF conditionalities drops down to like 30. So this massive reduction because, whether or not you like China, I'm not a fan of the CCP, but creating the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, creating this parallel institution, eliminated a monopoly and everyone benefited. So how does that relate to Bitcoin? If you, like some of these CBDC advocates have pointed out, believe that there is value in creating a digital money, or even a necessity to create a digital money, it's very easy to kind of just take whatever proposal you see for digital money and compare it to this like nebulous world and say, well, we need it, so we're going to use it. Now they can't get away with that. They can't just say, oh, internet money is good, so we're making a CBDC, shut up and take your medicine. They have to prove that what they've created is better than Bitcoin. That's a really high bar. and so I think that Bitcoin, in the same way that the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank put downward pressure on the conditionalities attached to IMF loans, that's just a random example, but I think Bitcoin does the same thing with CBDCs because and Xi Jinping will have to understand this as well, insofar as his goal is to onboard people to the digital yuan. Why do you think he's banning Bitcoin? Doesn't want people to be able to compare the social credit system, the centralization, the surveillance, is sort of inextricably linked with the Chinese central bank digital currency and a free open source, open global permissionless monetary network. And I think that will actually happen here in the United States to some extent as well. I think that CBDCs built in a world with Bitcoin by very nature have to be better than whatever the government, what sort of Orwellian like panopticon the government would have developed without Bitcoin. Not that they won't be an Orwellian panopticon, they probably still will be anyway, but we're at least having conversations about digital cash, right? That's something that Bitcoin very, very explicitly changed about the and shaped about the CBDC debate. It's not just this recognition that we need internet money and digital money for an internet and digital age. It's that these rights that we've had that were implicit, like the right to use cash, are starting to kind of slip away. And we actually can't be passive about this. We have to examine critically which of these kind of de facto rights that are being erased by technology do we choose to bring with us into the digital world. And cash is like a perfect example of this, where there's nothing in the Constitution that says you have a right to use cash, but none of the founding fathers could have ever imagined a world in which a transaction would by necessity be placed on a centralized repository accessible to the government. And so if you view the Constitution as sort of a mediation of rights and privileges between people and states, the condition under which that contract was written was one in which cash was just the assumption. It was just the state of the world. Now, it's not entirely clear whether or not like my children will have cash, but I know that because Bitcoin exists, they will have a really viable cash alternative. And so that's another way in which Bitcoin has influenced this debate, where the government is now sort of going through great efforts to say, oh, you know, our CBDC will be privacy protected. We promise we're going to retain we're going to retain the properties of cash. So Bitcoin set set a floor. It said if the public is going to accept this, it can't just be money that has faster settlement speed. It can't be just money that's digital. It has to be cash. So, you know, the market will decide. And I just think people will have a hard time believing that spending their $5 of Fed coin is the same as spending $5 of Bitcoin. Like if you want that experience of paying for something in cash, you're not going to feel comfortable using your CBDC for it. So,
well, a lot of people will, because they have no idea what we're talking about. They have no idea of the threat. They're not red-pilled. And that's the thing is, you can get very far down this Bitcoin rabbit hole and you do not understand the mindset of somebody who is a no-coiner, whose only exposure to Bitcoin is maybe seeing something in a tabloid newspaper, which is just some alarmist article about climate change. There's a lot to consume to get to the point of living a standard normie life,
right,
where you go to work, you get paid, you pay your tax, you do your shopping, you go to the pub, to suddenly reconsidering your entire mental model around what is the role of money, how it operates, how the government issues it, what are the cynical things they do. That's a big leap. You've got to do a lot of work, you've got to do a lot of reading, listen to a lot of really cool podcasts.
You know, I wonder what the statistics on this would be. You know, if you just asked people, you know, would you be okay if we got rid of cash? Like, I hear your point, but I also think that most people can recognize this like fundamental value to using cash. And it's a nice kind of opportunity to make this a really bipartisan thing as well.
But people are moving away from using. I haven't had a single dollar in my pocket this entire trip.
Well, it's not about you know, the sort of percentage of your transactions that are denominated or made in cash. It's about sort of the extant properties of cash, like knowing that I can have some in my wallet and knowing that I can choose to pay for certain things in cash. And there's like an endless amount of examples that you could get into where someone wants to pay for cash. You know, maybe you're taking medicine you don't want, you know, someone to know that you're taking. Maybe you're buying a book about politics that's like a little edgy. You don't want someone knowing about that. Maybe you're making a donation to a certain religious group or nonprofit. Like,
I think those are really rare edge cases where people really think that through. I just think they are. I get it, and I agree with you. I just don't think people have been red-pilled enough to really understand and think about it. Like, I bring this up time and time again. All my friends know I have a podcast, right? They know it's a Bitcoin podcast, okay? Of my group of friends, one of them knows a bit about it because he bought some, but he trades shitcoins. If we go down the pub and talk about this, I sound like a nutter.
Well, you just sound like a nutter in general.
Well, no, but they think I'm mad. Okay, they think I'm a conspiracy theorist. They think I'm anti-state, but in the world of Bitcoin, I'm actually quite moderate. But in their world, I'm crazy. I'm telling you, they think I'm crazy. My family did. We've got my brother there. We've orange pilled my brother. It's taken some time. He's in now. He gets it. But I'm just saying, it's a big leap.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it's a conversation that, like you said, I think a lot of people aren't ready to have. And in my view, it's one that we need to be debating very rigorously. And
in the public and open.
In the public, right. It's wild to me that as recently as like 6 or 7 months ago, both the Fed and just basically no agency in government, let me put it that way, was really willing to give comment on the CBDC proposals or eCash proposals that they were like working on. You can tell that if we were to just sort of leave this issue alone, the government would prefer that we all just wake up one morning and we're using CBDCs. And I just think this is truly an example where it's yes, it's about the technical merits of a CBDC versus Bitcoin. And, you know, it's easy to have that argument, but it's deeper than that. It really is about which of these sort of fundamental assurances of living in America that are not codified in law, but in practice, do we risk eschewing when we move to an increasingly digital world? Like, we have to be so vigilant about this. And it's terrifying to me that proposals for a CBDC are just kind of happening behind closed doors. And it's ludicrous that, you know, journalists are trying to get in touch with some of these, you know, entities, and they're just kind of declining to comment. If the government is sort of pondering something that's going to strip liberties away from you, and their response is no comment, then we need a lot of attention on that issue.
What do you think the founding fathers would have written into the Constitution if it was now?
Ooh. Well, so it's interesting, right? You know, privacy. The word privacy is not in the U.S. Constitution.
No, but you're mildly protected in the Fourth Amendment, right?
Precisely. And so this is a good sort of shoe in here.
Although regularly the Fourth Amendment is brought up, and it's...
Yeah. So the word privacy is not in the Constitution. The Fourth Amendment, you know, protects you against unreasonable search and seizure.
Would you call NSA reading every message, able to track and listen to every call, unfair search and seizure?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
And it's still going on.
Precisely.
And
so of course.
Snowden's still living in Russia when he's actually somebody's exposed something.
Right. So, yeah, the word privacy is not in the Constitution. And I think it's for several reasons. Yes, it's because the Fourth Amendment you would generally expect. Like, what else would you kind of protect? Like, how else would your privacy have been violated back then? You know, someone's looking through your window at your house. Like, you're not going to put that in the Constitution. So, I don't know what would have been changed. That's a really tough question, but I think it's quite clear that the implications of the internet and distributed software like fundamentally color the mediation of power between states and people, that they grant governments unimaginable levels of surveillance. I think Hamilton, of all of them, would probably be a CBDC fan. I mean, he would enjoy, I think, the ability to kind of readily dictate monetary policy. I think Jefferson would be turning in his grave if he heard about like CBDCs.
But just say cash generally. Even forget the technology argument. The you know, if
yes, 100%.
You have a right to free speech, you have a right to bear arms. Well, money is the lubricant.
A right to cash, I think, would almost certainly be written in the Constitution. If we could travel back in time and say, hey, this is what the world looks like. Here's what's being debated by the government. Cash is like almost eradicated. And now every transaction, if some people have their way, will be logged onto a single, you know, I don't think they know what a database is,
but I think you're going even too far in that one. Again, forget the technology argument. I'm saying the right to have, hold, and use cash.
Yes,
because you have a right to free speech.
Yep.
Okay, you have a right to bear arms. Do you have a right to monetary sovereignty? And what I mean is the risk of being cut off from the financial system. What you said at the start, you know. Should that right exist? Should the government be able to switch you off from access to cash, to money? Because that's the fundamental thing. You put you take. A lot of people say the Second Amendment protects the First Amendment. Okay, but if there's nothing to protect money,
You don't get any amendments.
yeah, and I think sometimes hasn't the First Amendment been used to protect cash in some ways?
Well, the
Coded speech.
yeah, the jurisprudence that I've read has been pretty bearish on the argument that, a transaction constitutes speech. I obviously feel quite differently. To your point earlier, that world where, you say, should the government have a right to just have an on and off switch to people's finances? That was incomprehensible to the people that wrote this nation's charter documents. And so as such, I think that it makes it obvious, I guess, one, that document is insufficient to properly represent like a fair mediation of like rights and powers
In 2022.
in 2022. And I think I would like to think that were the Constitution written with knowledge of what the world would look like today. I mean, I think a lot of the founding fathers didn't believe that. It's funny, like if you read kind of contemporaneous like writings by a lot of the founding fathers, I think that they would have been thrilled if that document had made it 30 years. If that thing had lasted a generation, they would have been like, all right, like we did our job. Like I don't think any of them really truly thought that America would still be using that same document centuries later. I mean, I think that thought was incomprehensible to most of them. And there's sufficient kind of evidence to suggest that this was like a rough draft. It was like a first stab. Like, let's put this on paper and try out this new America thing. And while they took the project very seriously, yeah, I think that they all would have thought it was a success if their kids were using this Constitution. I don't think anyone thought that we would just kind of converge around this document and have it kind of ossify and just stay with us hundreds of years later. Like that would have been wild to them, I think. And yeah, I would like to think that they would have included with a knowledge of how the world would look now and that we'd still be using that document, a right to cash.